Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space Patreon. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm wondering, where is everybody? I look out my windows and the streets are barren.
Yes. Well, that's just the modern world that we live in. Really, it was just the housing crisis, the cost of living. No one can be on the streets anymore. Or is it the nuclear isotope gas that's been released across the world?
I won't tell you which I'm hoping for.
Yes, we are. We are back with our post-apocalyptic season. I suppose it's
Apocalypse.
I want to do that. I want to have like a trailer guy, like that in a world where, in the post-apocalyptic world, two podcasters. Yes.
Try to make sense of reality.
Yeah.
Will they succeed before they die?
No, I think is the clear answer. Yes, we are sort of continuing the sort of things, but we've come out of our Mad Max block, and the tone is changing somewhat. We are going back to the 50s. We are doing this for Patreon on the main feed, but we're doing another film from the same year, 1959. Today, we are going to be talking about The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. And this is going to be sort of running in parallel with the other 1959 post-apocalypse film, On the Beach. So main feed for that. This one is a little different. This is a miner, played by Harry Belafonte, is trapped in a cave and is able to resurface 5 days after the accident, discovering that mankind has been wiped out in a nuclear holocaust, and sets out to find survivors, ending up in New York City and aligning himself with a woman, played by Inga Stevens, and eventually a fellow survivor, Mel Ferrer, played by Benson Thacker, played by Mel Ferrer. This is a 3-person cast, but it's still kind of epic in many ways. So yeah, I mean to get into it. So what are your initial thoughts then about The World, the Flesh, and the Devil?
Well, first of all, this establishes the power of an empty New York City long before Vanilla Sky.
Yes.
Which really makes an impression. The whole minor survival sequence at the beginning is kind of weak, but it's kind of like, oh, that would pass for a Twilight Zone episode. And, it's hard not to think of how many Twilight Zone episodes have,
the very first episode. Yes.
Which is literally, where is everybody?
Yeah.
Is the title, which is also the question that prompted the Fermi paradox.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there's a metaphor there in all those episodes. But I like this film. I think that it takes a little while to get going, and I think its ending is abysmal. But in the middle, there's good stuff.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's an interesting one for me. This is because it's I kind of like the open. I think it's Harry Belafonte. This is my first Belafonte movie. I knew of him mainly through music. I always sort of associated him. I don't know why. I think one of my grandparents thought it was the calypso music. I thought the dancing, and that's it. But he's kind of good in this. He's charismatic. He plays it well. He's playing the miner, and he's sort of this everyday kind of blue collar Joe sort of he's there sort of just he's a mining inspector and all sort of stuff, which works well for when he's able to do stuff later on. It kind of makes at least a little bit more sense that this guy's obviously worked in these different trans. So when he starts to sort of put things together later on, like the electronics and other bits and
Hmm.
pieces, well, okay, I get that. He'd better figure this stuff out. I like following him and him sort of like wandering through the world and being like, picking up bits of information from headlines and stuff. All that's kind of good. Um, the problem I have with this film is there's only three people in it. The more people you add to this film, the worse it gets.
Yeah, that's true.
I think
You
that's
want to
sort of
elaborate? I mean,
well,
just
yeah,
kind of,
no, okay, that's because obviously, so the first sort of what 15, 20 minutes maybe is Belafonte on his own,
oh, at least, yeah,
which I love, and there's some great scenes of him wandering from through a small town at first that feels like a sort of a small set, but it's nice, it's well staged, it looks good. But then when it's him walking through, and some of it's through backlot and matte paintings and all this other stuff,
yeah,
but there's other stuff that's clearly like they've cleared a dock, they've cleared streets, they've done bits, and the bridge and the parts of the bridge and that sort of thing. When it's him walking through those desolate, abandoned places, and him starting to sort of pick things up like that, we'll talk about the mannequins, Snodgrass, and all that sort of thing. And he's sort of establishing himself on his own, and he achieves like you sort of feel for him, like you're following him. So his achievements become your achievements. So when he has that moment of putting on connecting the electricity and getting it started, the generator, and then he runs up to I think it's like the Empire State to go and see it from a distance, and he can see that his block is sort of like illuminated. That is kind of a cool moment. And then he meets Sarah Crandall, double L, um,
mm,
and you know, it's then sort of this weird. It's every time there's a transition, it's kind of awkward. It doesn't I don't know whether it was the director or the writer. It kind of like clunkily moves into the next phase in shorthand, and then and now this is the new norm. And all of a sudden they're like neighbors, and they're sort of like they're going out to have dinner, or they're doing this, they're doing that, and you're like, okay, well now it's this, but like there's never any, and then then they do have like Mel turns up, so Benson, this guy turns up on a boat, and at first you're like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting, that's a good way of doing it, and then that becomes
right.
incredibly clunky for like 5 minutes before they go, and this is the new norm, and then it sort of becomes that again, and then it's sort of but there's no tension throughout the entire film. The tension just is sort of isn't. There's no sort of like urgency of going like, well, hell, the world's gone. That this whole film seems to be about them wanting to. We sort of touched on it off air, but this whole film is about them wanting to get back to that, the norms, social norms of the old world. But it makes no sort of sense. So there's no tension. Like there's no one going like, you know, I don't know. I think. Oh, what are your thoughts before I go off any further?
Well, I mean, I think I agree with you. I would point out that the shots of the tunnel and the bridge going into New York, filled with cars, these are all very affecting to me.
Yes.
Um, along with the shots of the city and all of this. Um, we talked off air about how that stuff kind of recalled the Will Smith "I Am Legend,"
Hmm.
which I pointed out like this feels more like New York. It makes me feel like that movie just occurs in Central Park and his
Yeah.
apartment. Um, this feels like New York to me. But so all that stuff is enjoyable. I know what you mean. You introduce the girl, and then it becomes a will they, won't they kind of story. Um, and then you introduce another guy, and it's a love triangle, and it's like, well, this is kind of the most pedestrian thing you could do with this story. Um, that's true. I guess that what I like about it is, freely conceding that it's not a realistic look at like, well, we've got to start repopulating, but who will our kids have sex with?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
there's
Yeah.
none of these conversations, right? Um, how much power do we have? What is the long-term projection of this? There's a lot of that I'm missing of just kind of like that Walking Dead survival stuff. Um, That being said, what I love about this movie is the race and gender stuff. That really, you know, the idea that they're holding on to the old world, but the idea that that racism is so strong that it cannot be eradicated from their minds even after the apocalypse.
Well,
That is like
yeah,
kind of devastating to me.
yeah. Because that's where this is going to go. So we might as well sort of jump into because that's sort of the core of this in many respects. Is this thing is you end up with this sort of trinity of people, two men, one woman, and one of them's white, one of them's black, and you have all these sort of so they're trying to throw these things in. The things that kind of sort of on what you're saying though, that sort of I don't know, not bothered me, so much, but like I got the wrong person seems to keep getting annoyed about the thing that's the issue, if you know what I mean. So,
No.
so for example, when it's Ralph, Harry Belafonte's character, and Sarah, and they've gotten close, and she's then asks him to cut her hair, and he gets
Yeah.
annoyed because he's like, "I'm an engineer, not, I'm a miner. I don't know what the hell I'm doing." And he starts to get increasingly frustrated. And he said about what you're going to do, and she said something like, "I'm young, white, and free," or something.
Yeah, so apparently that was a common phrase back then, which
Yeah,
is news to me. And it's I'm free, white, and 21.
that's
Apparently
it.
that was like a
Yeah,
thing you said to be like, yeah, I can do whatever I want, right?
yeah,
Like, what do I have to complain about? I'm free, white, and 21. I guess that was a saying. Like,
yeah.
that's kind of
But
horrifying. But
okay,
okay, don't want to put that on a t-shirt today.
yeah, knowing that's a common phrase in 1959, 58, that's kind of horrifying. Um, but and he takes offense at that.
Yeah,
But she doesn't mean it in a sort of
yeah.
like you say, it's just an off the cuff kind of comment. He then takes offense at that, understandably, right? And she apologizes and says, "Oh my God, look, I didn't mean it like that.
Hmm.
Literally, just I didn't think." And then, but then it's sort of like he then sets up her birthday at this club, and they've done this fancy thing. Like he's literally recorded a song, and he applauds himself, and it's all very cute, and I kind of like it. And then she says to him, "Well, come and sit with me." And then
Hmm.
he gets arsy and says, "Oh, I can't sit with the customers." And it's almost like he's playing like a part of going, "Oh, I can't sit." And it's like, hang on, the person that's got a problem with race here is the black guy. Like she's
Yeah, I
gone
think
like, no,
that's
she's going
yeah.
like, no, what? I don't. And she keeps getting confused, going, I don't know, like what the problem is. Like there's no one. She says like, there's no one else here. Like just can we just enjoy, be friends? And he's the one that sort of like it's ingrained in him, and so I got confused. I'm a little bit like, yeah, you're kind of making a problem that's not there at this point.
Yeah,
It
you're
becomes more
right.
of a problem when Benson turns up, but like when it's just those two, he gets annoyed, and he even calls it out and says like, you look at my skin, you're going to call me the N word, and she's like, no, and he storms
Well,
out.
yeah, she's not maybe that progressive, right? I mean, they don't
Hmm.
really have a conversation about it. I mean, I think that there were two problems with this. One is exactly what you point out, that he is the problem, not her.
Yeah,
And I think that's maybe done to avoid her being racist, right? And
but that'd be more
alienating.
interesting. A woman that's a young
It'd be
woman
more realistic.
that needs to sort of rely on him to survive, but struggles with the fact that she's reliant on a black man would be more
Yeah.
interesting.
I think it'd be more realistic.
Yeah,
Um, you know, but I do think that there's a version of the story that works. Um, like it's clear that he is struggling with his own internalized, not necessarily inferiority, but his own internalized racism, sense
mm,
of having a place. Um, I understand sort of, cutting a white woman's blonde hair. And she's asked you to do this, but this is very racially coded, right? And so he gets overly upset, but it's clear like something's going on, right? What's kind of missing are those like Othello like scenes of him alone with his interior space, or even sharing with her or something, a conversation where he really says, like, my whole life I've had to be careful who I talk to. I've had
Yes.
to make sure that I didn't look at a woman who looked like you, because that could mean I died.
Yes, and I think I agree. I actually really agree. That is totally something that's missing because every time he storms off, you don't get the follow-up of him having to process what's just happened. It often just sort of like moves on to the next scene, or like, after the birthday party, he goes missing for 3 days. And then
Yeah,
no, sorry, just before they've had another eye after the haircut, sorry. After the
yeah.
haircut, he goes missing for 3 days. And you know, he comes back and they're like, oh, he's like, friends again. I've bought you a present. He got like this massive diamond from somewhere, which doesn't really matter because they're worthless now, I suppose, in the afterworld. And he's gone to like a newspaper somewhere
Mm.
and printed like a big invitation for her birthday. And I'm going, there's a kind of mixed messages here. This is kind of, you know, odd kind of red flag romantic behavior going on here. I'm not sure.
Love bombing followed by being a dick,
Yeah.
avoidance. Yeah, no, you're not wrong. I think that's
Um,
part of what people probably objected to about the racial depiction, is
mm,
that um, he's the problem, right?
yeah.
She is very progressive, and he's the one who's struggling with it. And you can see how they might have wanted to go that way, just to kind of address these issues, but avoid being conventional, or, people take offense. But it
Mm,
ends up sort of being offensive the other way.
yeah. Yeah. The thing is, like you say, it's not terrible, but it's this is that thing of it being clunky.
Yeah. I mean, I still think there's something redeemable about it. I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think not just him being alone, but also this whole discussion of race, this whole way in which, um, the old systems of the old world will not die on that day, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think that's fascinating, especially having done like Mad Max, where you had an observation about this.
Well, this is the thing. This thing because it is about the holding on to the old world in two different ways. Because Ralph starts collecting all the stuff like paintings and books, and he's collecting and saving. But then when Benson turns up and he's with Sarah, like they're all wearing suits. They have like dinnerware. They're all sitting around drinking and having cigars. And so they're all clinging on to this old thing. And the point I find is I'm sort of with the Australians where I'm like, yeah, the bombs fall or the nuclear thing goes. I'm stripping down to stockings and suspenders and a metal helmet, and I'm off riding through the desert. Like that's it. The freedom of the world, the old world is gone. New
You're
rules
like, call me
apply.
Bugaloo. I only
Yeah,
wear metal clothing now.
that's it. Yeah, yeah.
Like,
I am the Dark
what the
Knight
fuck?
Boogaloo. Yeah, like it just
Eh,
feels like so. You mentioned the word pedestrian, and I feel that's a really good word for this film. It constantly sort of like, although we get the sort of there are those racial tensions, and we'll get to the gender tensions as well.
mhm.
But generally, like every time something happens, the follow-up or the resolution is like, "Are we friends again?" Everyone goes, "Yes," and that's kind of how the film ends.
Okay, so let's acknowledge the end of the movie is fucking awful. Okay.
Yes.
Um, but like if you imagine this as like, I was thinking of like Sartre's No Exit, right? I mean, we had a episode of Twilight Zone like that with them in the trash can.
Hmm.
Um, if you imagine like an afterlife, basically, in which these three people are there and nobody knows why, right?
Yeah.
This could be an amazing story.
Mm.
And that's essentially what this is, right? It's like, okay, so we're stuck together. You're black, I'm white. Obviously, there's nobody else in this afterlife or in this world, right? Like, how do we get over those old world ideas because they don't really apply? But my whole life, I've been taught to see race in this way and gender in these ways. And I
Yeah.
think that is a fascinating story. At moments, this does that. And I think those are the best moments. I mean, what I find haunting about this is that idea of like racism and misogyny don't die with the
Mm,
world, right? They're in our brains and they are persistent fucking viruses. Like
yeah,
that is a brilliant idea,
it
right?
is. It is. It doesn't quite play out in it. I like the idea,
I agree.
and I do like. I think the misogyny plays out better in as a concept in this than the race does. Like it's almost like they hired Harry Belafonte, and we're kind of like we want him because he's charismatic and he can do the bits, and he's a name and all this other stuff. And then but then they acknowledge, okay, well, we've kind of got to acknowledge he's a black guy, but we don't want to go too far into this because he's a star in his own right and doing all this other stuff. So it kind of feels like shoehorned in, but like you said, but not um taken to its natural conclusion. Like it's not really taken anywhere. Um, but the gender stuff, the misogyny in this is like dripping off it by like the second half of this. Even before Benson turns up, there are several moments where it's sort of like, um, even um, even Ralph sort of has moments of sort of like the way he treats Sarah, sort of like a little bit like, well, you're a woman and
Yeah.
do this, do that. Um, but the real point of this, the real sort of this thing of like you can explain the sort of the title, the biblical sort of like thing of the title because that's what it sort of comes to. But this when this Benson guy turns up, all of a sudden it comes about. Well, there's two men here. Which one of us is going to get to marry Sarah? And even I'm going like, I didn't even know that was a question. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't that seems like a really odd thing to get hung up on at this point.
Yeah, you said like, why is there even still marriage, right?
Yeah.
Because, well, keep in mind, like, I mean, you would go full Mad Max. I'd be like, this is the new religion, and
Yeah.
I'm the head of it. Like, um, we worship pugs.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, but certain people would say, this has all been predicted by prophecy. I mean, even though religion isn't a big theme here, but um, certain people would fall back on the old ways, right?
Hmm.
I don't think that those tropes or the ways that they see the world would just give up, would just evaporate. Um, and certain people would become, I mean, it's like fundamentalism, right? I mean, fundamentalism is defined as a reaction against modernity. That's
Hmm.
exactly like you have phones. God didn't want phones. You
Yeah.
have airplanes. God didn't want airplanes. You can see women's ankles. God didn't want that. That was the origin of fundamentalism.
Hmm.
Not to alienate our Christian fundamentalist audience, not that we haven't already by now,
Yeah.
but I mean that's what fundamentalism is. So I would not be surprised if there was an equal fundamentalist movement, sort of in response to the end of the world, right? It's
Quite.
stressful times, but
Yeah.
this isn't really religious. I mean, this is race, and it is still that kind of like old-fashioned stuff. They just want the world to keep going on.
This is social norms rather than
Yeah.
like religious fundamentals. Yeah. I mean, Benson is clearly the more sort of misogynistic of the two,
Yeah.
and he keeps and but what's interesting, and I do find him as an interesting character because he turns up on a boat and he's been tied to the I was gonna say steering wheel, but you know what I mean, the sort of
Mast.
yeah, he's tied himself so he can sort of stay there, and he's obviously been at sea for quite some time. And then when they talk about where he's been, he says that he's been in the Southern Hemisphere and he's been traveling around for the last 6 months. But he had a wife and two children. And after everything happened, he's only just been to where they were living. So you don't know where he was when all these events happened. It never gets clearly explained. But he's been trying to, but he was like, I couldn't face it. I didn't want to see them. And he says, I didn't. I basically sort of, he went there, it was abandoned, and he left, assuming their death. So he's already been married and he's had the family thing. And so I'd say he's definitely more conservative because straight away he's just like, oh, a free white 21-year-old. I think I shall shackle myself to that one. um, within like days of him. No, sorry, within hours of him
Reviving.
reviving, it becomes this competition of she is the prize. And
Yes.
it's just this weird, to me, this weird like divergent thing this film takes off on. I'm just like, I'm sorry, I really don't understand this. Like, yeah, all right, so she's attractive, whatever, but like, why is it so like, well, there's two men here and one woman, and she's got to choose, and you're going like, this makes no sense. Why are you trying to break up? You stick together to survive. Like, this is insane.
So you mentioned she's attractive. I mean, just as a side note, one of the things that bothers me most, I'm willing to go along with keeping the overworld alive and enjoying these perks and all of that, right?
Hmm.
At least for a while. One of the things that most bothers me is when people like look put together in
Yeah,
a
the whole time.
post-apocalyptic world, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like, at one point he's been hauling up water. So it's like you are a very diligent man to be showering every day in water that
yeah,
you've hauled up, 60 flights or something. Um, it's quite a fall as we hear from the plates. Um, yeah, so they do look entirely too put together in their suits and all this. Um, okay, so let's do the thing that we always do of rewriting.
yeah.
Okay. Uh, in Act Two, with where there's only two characters, Act Two is basically fine.
Hmm.
It needs like two more conversations. It needs, some conversation about like survival and what the future is going to be like, which could be, um, predicated upon the radio transmissions, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But some discussion of the future and long term what their plans are. Does it make sense? What does marriage even matter? This kind of thing. Um, and then there needs to be some sort of mention of giving him internal Othello like space to wrestle with race and just kind of give a line or two that kind of explains a little more why he's so reluctant, right? Um, okay, but basically that whole middle section is fine.
Hmm.
Not the best thing ever, but it's good. I'm willing to go along with, you know, these problems of not being as focused on survival. Right. When the third man arrives and he revives, it just takes a left turn and it just keeps veering in that direction until it comes up with this nonsense conclusion. And all of that just needs to go. Right?
Yes.
Like that just needs to go right away. Um, he needs to be the catalyst um for Ralph, the Harry Belafonte character, getting his shit together and really making a decision. And instead, you think that's what it's going to be at first, right? Because it's like, oh, now I've got a rival for the girl who I clearly have feelings for, but am reluctant to express anything. And maybe that could be race. It could also be what is the point of having children or having a relationship in this doomed world. I mean, you know, I'd like a few lines there, but that's basically fine. But having a rival should be a reason for you to come out of your shell, right?
Mm.
And finally make your feelings known. Instead, he retreats completely.
Yeah.
It just says, "All right, Mr. Misogynist, you take her." And then she's totally triggered by that, understandably so. Um, and then the sort of like misogyny, you know, uh, version of the Rachel argument comes out, which is interesting and good. I do like that stuff, but you know, turning a a brave post-apocalyptic movie starring a black man as the lone male survivor of the human race for a
Yeah.
while, a brave movie into a pathetic love triangle,
Oh.
is not the smartest.
The thing I thought about with this, as I was watching it, we've talked about this sort of, we mentioned, and we will get to in a future episode, the Will Smith I Am Legend. So, there's those comparisons with the views of New York, the use of the mannequins, and, so he's got someone to talk to, all that kind of stuff, which I kind of get. When it gets to the end, though, two things sort of like sprung up in my head as I was watching this. You say about we're rewriting it. This trilogy, this Trinity doesn't work. There are too few people in this to create a suitable amount of tension because, as you said, like the natural survival instinct just tells you we've got to stick together on this to
Yeah.
survive. Like we've got to do our thing. So that sort of like makes total sense, right? That's what it should be. Um, so that's where I'm like, this is silly. This is kind of annoying me. But the thing that I thought about is this needs like a group of people. Like, it doesn't have to be a massive group, you know, and that's where you get the actually the tension between Ralph and Ben should be about the direction that the group goes in. Now, it could be represented by who ends up with Sarah, because that becomes almost like king and queen or whatever of the group kind of thing, you know. And as soon as my head went to that, I was like, oh, this is Rick and Shane from Walking Dead.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And that's what I was like. I ended up basically writing in my head Walking Dead. I was like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, that's why the first season, the first thing that works and that I like actually, the first and second season of that. But I was like, oh yeah, that's why that tension between those two works, is because it's actually about direction of the group as well as having sort of relations with the main female lead. So I don't know. Yeah, this feels
Well,
too small. We like small stories, but this feels too small to try and to do what it's trying to do.
I'm more of a fan of the governor stuff myself,
Hmm.
but I know what you're saying, and I think that then it could even be that the rival would play into racism for the crowd,
Yeah,
and you'd see the ways in which, like, well, racism is marshaled for power dynamics, right? Racism is really is really a political idea,
yeah.
um, about how society should
To
be
turn a
governed.
group
It's
against
not
people. Yeah,
right. I mean, that's its origins, right? It's not just a dislike for one person, right?
yeah.
It's, fundamentally a systemic idea. Um, and so, yeah, that would be a lot better and a lot more interesting. It is sort of, I mean, I can see how they wouldn't want her to be the racist one,
Hmm.
and then because you certainly don't want to go into like the tropes of like, it's the end of the world, like finally I can get a white girl, like,
Yeah, yeah.
you don't want to play into the racist tropes that have
Mm.
long plagued this country.
Yeah, the
um
Mississippi burning kind of sort of trope. Let's just not go there. Yeah.
oh yeah, and so it's touchy, these are touchy issues, but
Mm.
I kept wondering, what I want is like, where is the Star Trek kiss, right? Like, I mean, you keep imagining like this is going to end with the two of them getting together and they're going to
Yeah.
kiss, right? And this is going to be 1959. It's just a kiss. Maybe they're holding hands. It's probably pretty restrained, but it's going to end with like a big, middle finger to Mississippi in the
Yeah.
South, which is going to boycott, right? Um, that's true. They would have,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
but if they could damn well do it, a decade later on TV, they could do it, you know, movie theater. But no, it definitely it pulls its punches, and I think you're right that the three-person, it's even strange just in terms of plot, because now not only is it where are all these bodies, but also like, really nobody else survived, like nobody else was like, there are like bomb shelters, right? There are like basements.
Yeah. No, yeah, I had that in my head and I thought, that's obviously where um the budget wouldn't stretch to that kind of thing. I don't think they could depict that kind of thing on screen. There's I think we will get to a little bit of that with some of this stuff, but there's a book called 48 by one of my favorite authors, James Herbert, which depicts like an alternate history in which during the Second World War, Hitler released a bio weapon over Europe, and people literally just died in the street, just collapsed. But if you had a certain blood type or a certain sort of gene, you were a very small percentage of the global population was actually immune, and you end up sort of following some of that thing, and it's got that story. But that is literally the main character of that lives in a hotel. It's got like a luxurious hotel. They're living in, I think, wherever is in London. And there's a whole part of the book about them moving the bodies so that sort of they don't start decomposing near the hotel and stuff. So he's basically, yeah, I'm dumping them down this part and into Hyde Park and stuff so they can go and rot around in the sun, but they're not near where I am in the hotel. And
Mhm.
so I do feel that's missing from this as well, where I'm like, yeah, where is everybody? Like, it's great to see the abandoned streets and all that kind of stuff. It's
Mhm.
amazing. But when you are told what happened, that it was an isotope, a nuclear isotope gas or dust that was released into the atmosphere, that's when I'm like, yeah, the place, if that's the case, everyone died of radiation sickness, like, there'd be, not just because there's cars crashed into things and stuff, but there's no one ever inside them. So I'm like, cool, so where are all the bodies? Like, this is not the rapture. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what really happened.
Yeah,
That's that's your head canon.
yeah,
This is post rapture, and that's why I thought of No Exit. Right? Is
yeah,
this is um, the three people left, um, who all have dark secrets,
yeah.
right? Um, no, I mean obviously this sort of radioactive isotope thing doesn't make a lot of sense,
No.
and it's more like even like a neutron bomb leaves the bodies, right? Like
Mm.
this is very strange, and you just kind of like have to take it as a trope of the era that they can't show, uh like the first pages of Watchmen number 12, just like bodies after bodies after bodies strewn through New York.
Yeah, that's what I want to see, but I don't think we were never going to get that. Um, but yeah, that would have been kind of cool. Maybe we'll do like a George Lucas edit, and I'll start CG and bodies into the background.
And
Um,
then there'll be just like a little alien there playing the
yeah,
drums
that's it.
for
Yeah.
no reason.
Um, but this then moves on to obviously with Ben around this whole argument, and there's several scenes where like Ben instigates like and antagonizes Ralph. Like, he pokes him with his walking stick that he's got because obviously he's healing. And then like later on, like he basically there's a sorry, I also want to get to this scene. They've had this sort of scene where they've all been watching a news report and stuff. And Ralph's like, it's the best I could find, it's a bit of entertainment, and then they get confront each other. And that's when Ben says, we are there's only this we are three, there are two men and one woman, she's got to choose. And I know how to make, she will have to make a choice. Basically threatening that he's going to kill Ralph. Like, it's quite obvious where it's going at this point. And Sarah steps out. She's been sent to make them drinks. And there's a line where
Yeah.
Harry says, she knows how I like it. And I was like, this is dripping with innuendo, and he's clearly boasting to Ralph. Like, there's all this macho stuff all over it. No, she walks out and says, well, who are you to decide I'm a reward kind of thing, or I'm a prize to be chosen? And she storms out, runs down the street. Cool. All right. Benson runs after her. And I was kind of shocked by this moment. So he grabs her and they have this sort of talk. And then she says about them being together. And she says, okay, well, kiss me, make love to me. Da, da, da. And then, but he then says about forcing, basically says he's going to force himself on her.
Well, that's a little later,
Is it
right? That's
later?
back in the
Yeah.
apartment. No, they do have this kind of like altercation in the street, and he says that Ralph told him to follow her.
Mm.
I do think one of the things that's interesting about this love triangle is that Ralph basically wants no part of it.
Yeah, he's not
Ralph,
interested.
yeah, I mean, he has said it's clear he cares for her, but he has basically said it's not going to work. It's obvious that that's based on race, and I mean, like as soon as a white guy shows up, he's like, "Well, I know what's going to happen now." Like the two white people are going to match up, and I'm going to be left alone, and I am just resigned to that.
Yeah.
And again, I think I'd like a little more Othello kind of style dialogue, but I do think that's fascinating, right?
Mm.
Like, oh, well, you know, I'm trained to play second fiddle here, I do think, there is a dynamic there that's fascinating. The other thing I find interesting about it is that even though he's bowed out, he can't control how she feels.
Yes,
And so, because she is reluctant and she sees it as a love triangle, or she has feelings for Ralph,
both of them. Really,
it
yeah.
inevitably is a love triangle.
Mm.
So, this idea of like you can't bow out of a love triangle, like you're kind of stuck, I think is really a kind of fascinating one. I really do dig that. Um,
But there's a
but
line as
yeah,
well that Ralph says in a similar thing, 'cause when he is confronted by Ben, and he says about making him get out of the way, and Ralph says to him, he says, I'm not getting in your way, but just
yeah,
as much, I'm not going to get out your way either. So he's like, I'm not actively doing anything, but I'm also like, actively not getting out your way. Like, this is just how things are. Like, basically, like saying, grow up, you know?
yeah. It's that line is weird to me because I mean, the way I take it is basically like I'm not cock blocking you, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not it's inarticulate, right? I mean, I'm not trying to get the girl and I'm not trying to badmouth you behind your back or any of these things. On the other hand, I'm not going to leave.
Yeah.
Like I'm not making any moves on this girl. I'm not trying to win her over. But on the other hand, like I'm here. I'm not going to tell her that I don't care for her. I'm not going to, like if she comes to me and is interested, like she's going to have to make the first move, but I am, possibly receptive to that. But I'm not doing anything bad here, man. Like, yeah,
Well, no, this is where I would get if I was Ralph, and I think this just shows how petty I am as a human being, to be honest. But let's not forget that Ben's turned up. He's on his boat. We don't know about his technical
yeah,
capability. Ralph has set this building up. It's got electricity. He's done a bunch of other stuff. Like he's got the radio sorted out. At one point, Ben does tell him to move on. Like he confronts him with a gun and says, like, I think it'd be better if you move on. Like, go check out Chicago or San Francisco.
yeah.
And Ralph's going like, I'd be going, no, you go check out Chicago. If you're really that bothered, you take her and you go check out Chicago, San Francisco. I've made this a livable place. Piss off.
Hmm.
And if I end up getting sort of like, put the gun in my face, I'll be fine. I shall leave tomorrow. And then I'd spend the evening smashing the crap out of everything and being like, cool, you fix it. Bye. Like, I just sort of I was like, oh, you really are like this guy Ben. Like, say there was to say like white privilege is
Oh yeah.
there because he's like, you go, I'm taking over this building. Is really what he's saying. And I was just like, wait a minute, you've not done anything to contribute to this at all. Like you don't seem to do. You got your
Well,
bugger off for
also he
picnics, and
saved
you
your
just
life.
yes, yeah.
Like, how about a little gratitude, brother?
And but there is a moment because even what he's ill, and they do give him some medicine and stuff, and they do have that conversation about letting him die. And she
Hmm.
even she again she doesn't think she should, but she says Sarah says to Ralph basically, you could let him die. And he says, no, I can't. I have no choice. Like, that's clearly
Yeah.
the wrong thing to do. I can't, in the same way, I can't ensure that he lives because I don't really know medicine, but I can do the best I can.
Hmm.
So he's clearly the better person out of all of this.
Oh yeah. No, and he cannot. I understand that, right? Like,
Mm,
you can't. This is not in your self-interest, but you can't. You can't do this terrible thing.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I identify with that. I understand that. But no, you're right. I mean, uh, uh, yeah, Benson is a emblem of white privilege
Yeah.
and misogyny and I mean, especially like there's that uncomfortable that you alluded to sort of conversation where he threatens to rape her
Mm,
and then she says like you're making my decision easier and he says and I take it not in a positive way like
yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
yeah some girls kind of like to be forced seems to be
And he
I'm
does
gonna
use the
test
word
the
force.
waters here.
He uses the word forced. He does say, I could force myself on you.
Hmm.
And I was like, I was kind of shocked by that. I know this is 1959. This film's over 60 years old, but even so, I was a bit like, oh shit, like that's a hell of a position to take. To be like, I can win you over by raping you. was kind of like, oh shit, even okay, that seems to be, you know,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, he does hold out that possibility. It seems to me that,
it crosses
mm,
his mind.
oh, for sure, for sure. He's like, well, you're not making a decision,
Yeah.
right? I want you to decide for me, but you definitely need to make a decision here. You're hemming and hawing because, you
Mm.
know, one half of this triangle is hemming and hawing. Um, so I want you to make a decision. To force that, to prompt that decision, I'm going to threaten to rape you and
Yeah.
just point out if you don't make a decision, I can kind of make one for you.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like that seems, and maybe that's what you need to prompt you to make a decision. Like it's pretty toxic. It's pretty, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's we could justify it as like, he's a bad guy and this is, what people would do to survive, but it's pretty clear he's always been this guy, right?
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, yeah. You wonder about the relationship with his wife and two kids. Like,
yes.
there's clearly he never went to. He took 6 months to go and sort of visit for the potential of them being there. So there's all those sort of implications as well. But he draws a conclusion on all this, where he's like, "Well, look, all right, yeah, raping you is probably a bad idea. All right, hands up. You know, bad choice of words. I'm sorry. I'm going to go and kill Ralph instead." So he gets a gun and sort of challenges, basically sort of, he almost, I thought he was going to challenge him to a duel. I swear to God, I thought he was going to be like 10 paces.
Okay, so if it's been off the rails a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sort of like in Act Two, we kind of want a little more dialogue about survival and race. Act Three is kind of like this is taking a left turn.
Yeah.
I'm kind of confused why the characters are acting this way. Now we hit the climax in which nothing makes any sense at all. So he sort of realizes I've got to eliminate my rival, and then goes, gets a loaded pistol and goes and speaks to Ralph. And I thought he was just going to shoot him, Han Solo style, right?
Yeah.
Like, and actually, it's very strange because although he is somebody he's not, we don't know for sure that he's a rapist, but he's certainly comfortable threatening rape.
Mm.
Um, he then makes this very gentlemanly declaration to Ralph of sort of like, here's a loaded gun. I'm going to leave it with you and just show you I could kill you.
Yeah.
So I recommend you get out of town. Obviously, if you stay, things are going to escalate, which is an oddly kind of gentlemanly sort of way of going about it, right? It seems like, well, I mean, it's like, um, Jack Nicholson in The Joker talking about Boss Grissom, like, he was a murderer and a rapist. On the other hand, he had a lovely singing
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah.
Like he was a rapist and
Mm.
he is ready to kill the only surviving black man. On the other hand, he was gentlemanly about it.
Yeah.
Like I don't know where that's coming from. And then totally, totally passive Ralph is like, oh well, he's shooting at me with a rifle. I'll get a rifle and shoot back. And at no point does he say, or anybody say, like, this woman has expressed not wanting to be an object.
Mm.
You might be able to force her into a marriage or, into a relationship, but she obviously is going to hate you if
Yeah.
you murder the
It's
other
not
one.
it's not going to go well a year from now, is it? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's so bizarre, these choices that get made where, as you say, he sort of like vaguely threatens in a gentlemanly way, vaguely threatens Ralph. And then Ralph is sort of like, then she rings because she's already tried to call because she thinks he's gone out to kill him. And then she says, I need to see you straight away. And you kind of get the feeling that she's saying, I'm making a choice and it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
you. And so he's gonna go out. He's going out to his car to go over to her place. Um, and then Benson's sort of hiding out, and he's now got himself a rifle, and it becomes cat and mouse in an abandoned New York. And I'm not gonna say, I have got to say, although this is batshit crazy, it makes little to no sense. some of the shots,
Hmm.
some of the cinematography of this bit, some of the best parts of this film.
Well, Ralph going through the flooded subway
Yeah,
is really great. Yeah.
and also like there's a wet alleyway where you have like his reflection from up above, and then you have all these other bits, and then you've got Benson on the top on the edge of these buildings looking out over stuff. Like it's a really there's a scene where there's like a 360 pan around of the surrounding area, looking up
Mm.
at all the windows, and it ends up on Ralph. Like there's some really cool stuff where I'm like, this is really good. I've
Yeah, there's
no
some
idea
shots
what.
of there's some shots of him in the sniper's nest,
Yeah,
looking down on the city, as Benson's holding the rifle, that look great.
yeah. Don't know why it's happening, but it looks awesome.
I mean, it's a cool idea, right?
Yes.
On its own, but it's not really motivated by the script.
No, this is the kind of thing where, again, if we're talking, um, there's similar things. So we're talking, say, Shane and Rick. You can't protect her, Ralph. This is gonna be the thing of like she's made her choice. She needs to have made that choice. Ben needs to have seen she's made that choice, and we have the interracial kiss, and that's what throws Ben over the edge. Where he's like, well, she might have made her choice, but let's take that choice away from her, kind of thing, and I'm going to kill him off.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
and then it becomes the cat and mouse, and it becomes like the rejected, spurned Ben is the one that's chasing him down. That would be more interesting, but it isn't. It's just this. It just doesn't make any sense. And then we get to the ending. I just want to. So Ralph runs up to what I believe is the United Nations, and there's a big thing on the wall about
Hmm.
killing's bad, basically.
They shall beat their swords into plowshares.
Yes, basically, sort of
Nation
like
shall not lift up sword against nation.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's supposed to be the
War's
United.
bad.
War is bad. Yeah. So he throws his gun away, which even then I'm going like, no, you're gonna need that for hunting. You're gonna need that for the things. Like, you still kind of need that, but fair enough. Um. So he throws the gun away, and then he walks up to Ben. Ben quick draws on him and misses, and then they have this sort of like kind of weird confrontation where he's sort of like, I don't know, why can't we be friends? Why can't we be friends?
You do
Like,
almost think that's going to play, right?
yeah,
Like,
I don't understand this ending. I really don't understand this ending at all. I was scratching my head as to what happens. It's almost wordless, and they just sort
yeah.
of start holding hands, and then they walk off into New York. It's
Well, it's
bizarre.
even weirder than that because I sort of like that he walks up with no weapon and
Yeah.
it's this sort of like, you're gonna kill me, I'm right here, and we don't need any dialogue for that. I hate how he sees an inscription at the UN and it's
Yeah.
like, you know what, war is wrong. It's like, oh my god, like
Yeah.
I'm so sick of this. Like, it's like I'm out to murder somebody and their family, but then I saw, that cross on the top of a church and I thought, come to think of it, murder's bad. Wait a minute, I never thought of that. So I do really hate that as a motivation. I don't mind him then walking up, but then this reconciliation comes out of nowhere. And then Sarah arrives, and Sarah holds Ralph's hand,
Mm.
which seems to be okay. She's made her choice, right?
Yep.
She takes Ralph's hand. Apparently, she's made her choice, and they kind of just realize there's no point in killing anyone. Okay, the movie would still have problems at that point. But then, in the most unforgivable gesture imaginable, Benson, who has been holding a rifle, trying to murder one of them, trying to take all agency away from this poor woman, then holds out his hand and she takes that too. So it's like, oh, I
Yes.
guess she hasn't made a choice. And if they're going to, like,
Oh no, she
earlier,
has. She's made a choice. they can't show that choice in 1950s and early, or 60s cinema. At least not in mainstream cinema. But like you don't hear the conversation she's having with them. She's sort of like, she takes both her hands and all I hear is bow chicka wow wow. Like it's going into a completely different film after that. Like
Well, so you were suggesting like really the solution here is like let go of your Christian tropes. The apocalypse has happened. Just have a three-way, right? Like
yeah.
this is just like you can have a polyamorous relationship. Like it can be, non-monogamous. Like, there's one woman left in the world, right? Um, what are you gonna do? Complain, that you have to share her? I mean,
Yeah.
like uh, I don't know. So you're suggesting that's the real end of the film.
Yeah, that's what I think goes off. They all go to the hotel and it becomes a bit of an orgy. They burn off some energy and that's it. I mean, one of the things that never gets mentioned that really should is the fact that, Ralph has sort of made connect contact with other survivors
Hmm.
in the film, and that really should play into the ending of this film.
Yes, that just gets dropped.
Like she should hear something. She's the reason she comes out to end this should be the fact that because at one point Ralph makes contact with them. It's they're French. He just keeps saying somewhere in Europe, and I'm going, yeah, France. It's quite
Right.
clear.
They're speaking
They're
French.
speaking
They
French.
je parle pas anglais.
Yeah.
Like
Um.
yeah.
And but he says I can't hear you properly. They keep breaking up. He says you need more power. Your transmitter needs more power. The end of this should be they've got more power, and she should hear a clear transmission coming through the radio. And
Right.
so it should actually be like her saying, we should, why are we fighting? There are other people out there. We
We can't
need,
kill each
we
other.
can't kill
There
each
might be
other.
7 people left of the world or something, but
Yeah.
there's hope.
Yes, and it should be about that connection and stuff. And she should be running out and saying that, and that should be the thing that brings them together to say, it's not hopeless that we're down to this. There are more. So that would
Yeah,
explain a lot for me.
there are more girls in Europe, guys.
Yeah,
Like that's the solution. It's like I'm not the only girl in the world. Stop killing each other for me.
yeah,
There are probably women in Europe who you can threaten to rape.
yes. And we're going to travel thousands of miles just for you for that purpose. I don't know. It just feels like there should be an instigator as to why she intervenes and why they're sort of like pulled back from each other. I don't know. It just feels so like weirdly hippy dippy weird stuff at the end where it's just sort of like like I said,
Yep.
like, why can't we all be friends? It's so I don't know. It's a very, as you said, it's
Well,
a
it's
poor ending.
pat, it's cheap.
Yeah,
It's and it's a like stupid conservative idea of like racial harmony, right?
yeah.
Like
Do you know what makes it worse though? The
yeah.
real final slap in the face, which is probably I don't know if it was a trope then, but it's definitely a cliche and a trope now. Is when it comes up and it says the beginning instead of the end.
Oh, that's so terrible. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and implicitly, this is the beginning of racial harmony.
yeah.
I mean, this is the movie America needs, Dick. You
But
know.
there's there's only three of them, so it's not exactly going to be hands across America, is it? It's more like hands across the room. Like it's
No, but it's like if only the KKK, would look at the inscription of the United Nations, they would realize that they should
yeah,
hold hands with their black brothers.
yeah. That's exactly what it is.
That's the world just needs love, man. Like, if you just hold up enough flowers, they're gonna understand it.
See, the other thing this could have done is they could have come across another survivor. It could have been a black woman, and then they could have paired off, and then it'd have been like a spin-off into a sitcom, and they could have just had,
Mm,
they could have lived on. It could have been like, in this country, there was a one where a white guy and a black guy lived next door to each called Love Thy Neighbor, which can't be
mm.
aired on television at all anymore. Um,
Because of its racial content.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I
it
mean,
doesn't meet modern broadcast standards.
literally, if they found a black woman as they were running through the city at the end. And sitcom, sort of like music came up,
Yeah.
and it shifted into a scene from a sitcom. And then we saw like a bad sitcom episode in which Benson is in blackface trying to win over Sarah because he knows that Sarah likes an African American. That would literally still be a better ending than what we have now.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that would be totally weird but still better than what we get.
Yes. It's such an odd ending. Okay. I think we sort of leave it on that note, really. It will be in the notes, but obviously this film is available on YouTube. I'll put a link in the notes so you can go watch it. So you'll probably have seen that as you come into the episode. Um, it's one of those. I would say this is one of those that I thought about halfway through. I was thinking, oh, I'm surprised this has never been picked up by one of those boutique Blu-ray studios, Scream Factory or Arrow or whoever else. Get to the end and you're like, oh, this is why this has never been picked up by one of those because it's awful, or like, the ending does not pay off and it doesn't really work. So
Yeah. We've talked about sort of movies that get worse as time goes on or better, as the
yeah,
runtime goes on. You know, there are a lot of movies that start in a bad place and just get better and better, or start in a good place and just get worse and worse. This kind of starts in a bad place and then gets better, and it's just like, and then it's a good movie sort of
mm,
halfway through, and then by the end, it's really
about
problematic.
yeah,
And over in Europe, there's a Frenchie, in the ruins of the Eiffel Tower, going like, typical fucking Americans. They still kill each, leave it to them to kill each other over race, even now. Um,
yeah, yeah. That's it. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other parts of the world that aren't actually in this state and are getting on all right. But yes,
Meanwhile, in Australia, they're dressed in heavy metal designs and killing each other with maces.
yes, yeah, in Australia there was a gas shortage for a day and a half, and all of a sudden it went to pot, is what happened. Yeah. Anyway, any final thoughts then for the world, the flesh, and the devil?
Well, you mentioned about the title. I
Mm,
haven't explained that. That this is from Saint Thomas Aquinas, and thoughts about temptation, right? Because don't forget, Christianity hates the world, right? It's a world of temptation, right?
yep.
Sex and drugs and
Rock and
dancing.
roll. Yeah.
That's right. Um, when you set one foot on a dance floor, the devil has your soul forever. Don't forget it. Um, you know, Flesh, right? Mortify the flesh. The flesh is bad. Now, obviously, there have been different versions of Christianity, but you know, the world is destined to end in fire in the lifetime of every living Christian generation. So, how good can it really be?
Mm.
Um, in what sense is that a good title for this movie? Is
I
this
don't know.
movie about temptation? Like they need to pray and not have sex with each other? I mean, they seem remarkably conservative, you know,
I
as
was
is.
at one point because I didn't know that was from Thomas Aquinas. I was like, I didn't think. I was trying to think like, right, there's three things in the title. There are three
Hmm.
people in this film. Like, I was trying to.
Like
I was
the
trying,
good, the bad, and the ugly, right?
yeah,
Like,
literally, that's
yeah.
where I went. I was like, okay, so is Ralph the world because he's trying to save things and trying
Hmm.
to, maintain. That makes Sarah the flesh.
Hmm.
All right, that's kind of like applicable, but kind of gross.
Misogynistic, yeah.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
then makes Benson the devil. And then by the end of the film, you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, all right, cool, I'll go with that.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a Sergio Leone version of this
Yeah.
that is, much better than this. I mean, I do think this has a lot to recommend it.
Mm,
I wouldn't give it an overall thumbs up, but I mean, it's not bad. It's it's very interesting, and it's
yes.
misjudged in certain places, but you can easily see how. I mean, I would love like a 1970s style, sort of like harsh reality play about this couple, and or this triangle left alive, and how they can't get over their racist and misogynistic old world stuff. That's fascinating.
I'd like to have seen. We've talked about it. Well, I was going to say I'd like to have seen Rod Serling take this on. Rod Serling
Mhm.
did take this on.
Mm-hmm.
In the episode that came to mind was the opening episode of season 3, 2, which has got
Mm-hmm.
Charles Bronson and Elizabeth Montgomery in, which are the two opposing soldiers in a sort of post-apocalyptic war, and it's a man and a woman and all that kind of stuff, and they end up sort of being together. That was, to me, by the end of the film, I was like, oh, that's Rod Serling taking this story and doing his version in a sort of a 25-minute episode. So that really sort of like jumped into my head.
Yeah, you could have Ralph give a climactic speech, in another version of this where he's like, all those years of racism, making sure I didn't drink from the same drinking fountain or I didn't have the right to vote. All of that to prop up your power, and where is that power now? What was the point of that for humanity? Look at what that's yielded you, right? Just sort of like at least get at some of these issues,
Yeah.
and Serling would have gone for it. I mean,
Well, that's
2
what you
is
want.
a
Maybe that's what is
more
needed.
Soviet Union kind of,
Yeah. As
But
they
you're right. I
walk,
thought of that episode too.
as they walk off down the street, all of a sudden, sort of like Serling walks into the shot, with his cigarette in hand, and so we leave you with a picture of three people walking off into the sunset. But is it a happy sunset? Can race really be sort of resolved? Can race issues be resolved so easily? Is it all going to be done in the bedroom? Like there'll be some sort of monologue, and you'll be like, "Yeah, that's right, Rod. You've got it. You understand this." I don't know. It does. It feels a bit like you said, Pat. The ending is really sort of like, "Oh, okay, that's the end." It needs something like this.
Well, and it
Needed a bit of
pulls
a
its
shocker.
punches. No, I
Yes.
mean, right. It pulls its punches through the whole thing, but really, it doesn't have the confidence of its own convictions. It doesn't
Okay.
have the confidence of the ideas that it's teased. You know, even if it ends with one of the guys murdering the other guy, and it's like implicitly, this is where racism leads.
Mm.
You know, um, look at the shallowness, the jealousy of mankind. Um, you know, and then Sarah could say, I was just about to propose a threesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't have to do this.
Wah, wah, wah. Yes. So anyway, we'll leave it on that. I think we've sort of talked enough about the world, the flesh, and the devil. It is, I say, on YouTube. Go check it out. I think we spoiled quite a lot of it, but it's still, add it to your experience of 50s cinema. Anyway, for now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first of our season 5 Patreon exclusives. There will be more. I'm not going to give away all of them, but there are definitely more coming. I think the ones to mention are we're going to get some Will Smith. We are in the next episode on the main feed. We are going to be doing Last Man on Earth and Omega Man.
Mhm.
And on here on Patreon, we're going to cover I Am Legend, the Will Smith I Am Legend. As well as that, we're going to sort of continue, or we're going to complete our Quatermass journey. We're going to do the Quatermass conclusion. I'm quite excited by that because I'm going to watch both the film version and the TV version because it was actually originally sort of I think 4 episodes, then cut into a film. And the other one we're going to talk about that I'm very excited about. There's others, but we are going to talk about Hell Comes to Frogtown. We obviously did Roddy Piper in the last season. I've done it a few times, but we are now going to be talking about Hell Comes Frogtown. So basically, Roddy Piper does Mad Max and sex bots. So that's the kind of things we are going to be doing on the
How could you
Patreon.
go wrong?
No, it's amazing. So anyway, Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Been a great conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.